I married a man 3 years older than me, and everyone said he loved me to death. But not long after we got married, he cheated on me. He smoked, drank, fought, and even kissed other women in front of me. He did everything I hated. David, with a cigarette in his mouth, looked down at me. What? Regretting it now. I held the divorce agreement in my hand, pressed the crimson hot cigarette butt into his palm. David, you ruined me, you should have died the year you loved me the most. David reacted as if he had heard a huge joke, his shoulders shaking with laughter, really painful. Under the dim streetlights, two familiar figures stood close together. David had a careless smile on his face, roughly holding Helen's head, whispering something in her ear. Helen shyly responded, playfully hitting his chest. David laughed even more unbridledly, seeming to enjoy it very much. Today is the first anniversary of my marriage with David. I wanted to surprise him, but I accidentally saw this scene. I stood not far away from them, holding a cake in my hand, my feet like lead, unable to move. The surrounding noise was irrelevant to me, and my vision began to blur. David looked up, clearly saw me, but instead embraced Helen's waist even tighter, intimately. David and I stared at each other under the dim moonlight, neither willing to back down. David's eyes darkened, giving me a cold side face, then turned his head to look deeply into Helen's eyes, their faces getting closer and closer. He seemed to be testing my limits. At this point, he couldn't be bothered to act like he deeply loved me. The night wind messed up my long hair, a chill from the depths of my heart swept through my body, and my fingernails embedded themselves into my palms bit by bit. I didn't have the courage to see it all the way through. At the moment they were about to kiss, I turned and walked away. My heart clenched painfully, tears blurring my vision. I had just woken up from the nightmare, with no energy left to pretend. I ran too hastily, fell hard on the ground, scraped off a large piece of skin on my knee, bleeding a lot, but didn't feel the pain, nor had the courage to stand up. A pair of cold white hands reached out, David's voice as icy as the hands, no warmth, get up, what's with the act of weakness, it doesn't suit you. I looked steadily at David, trying to find a trace of the past tenderness in his eyes. Before, when I got a minor injury, David was even more nervous than me, unable to bear seeing me upset and crying. Now that I was in pain to the point of breathlessness, he didn't even furrow his brow. I don't know when David seems to have changed completely. He smoked, drank, fought, and shamelessly cheated. He did everything I hated. I couldn't believe he could change his feelings, asking for reasons over and over again. No matter how difficult it was, we could face and solve it together. Even if he was terminally ill, I would rather stay by his side, never leave. I didn't want to be the protagonist of a novel, kept in the dark hating him and forced to accept the good that he thought, yet he kept pushing me away, a blunt knife, torturing me slowly, challenging my limits time and time again. As he wished, he finally drained all my strength. Tears still flowed uncontrollably, but my tone was very calm. David, you ruined me, you deserve to die. His slender cold white hands trembled imperceptibly. Clearly, he provoked me first, intruded into my life without warning, teasing in ways that made my heart flutter. That summer, he was even willing to give up his life to save me. We went through so much, finally coming together, so why could love just vanish like that? Where did things go wrong? I wasn't trapped in that terrible nightmare just once. I had always been the child of others, excelling academically and coming from a wealthy family. My parents were the envy of everyone, a model couple deeply in love. I was supposed to have a happy and beautiful life. But one day, my parents started arguing out of the blue. Later, I found out that my dad was cheating. He said he loved my mom, begged her for forgiveness, but at the same time, he was entangled with another woman. My mom couldn't accept it, love and hate tormenting her, turning her unrecognizable long ago. She grabbed the other woman's hair hard, and they struggled together. My dad, on the other hand, protected the other woman, saying my mom was being unreasonable. After tearing each other apart completely, they fought fiercely over my custody. I became a work of art they had carefully cultivated, being fought over. No one ever asked me if I wanted this. Every argument they had, the twisted hatred on their faces, left deep imprints in my mind. I hid under the blanket, covering my ears tightly, not wanting to hear a single word. I no longer believed in love, marriage, or any human emotions. All the sweetness was just a mirage, so fragile, a mere illusion. I became very irritable, often unable to control my temper when my emotions fluctuated greatly. I would have nosebleeds, a large amount of blood gushing out. I tried hard to wipe it away, but ended up with a face and hands covered in blood. My classmates were terrified. Ever since then, whenever they saw me, they would avoid me as if I were a plague. I even heard them gossiping in private, saying Cathy is sick, we should keep our distance from her, or we might get infected. Her mom is sick too, heard she's mentally unstable. I listened to them calmly, like an outsider. Maybe they were right, maybe I was sick, and quite seriously at that. It's you who are sick, spreading baseless rumors behind people's backs. A soft and deep voice interrupted their conversation. Glancing in the direction of the voice, I saw a slender and quiet boy leaning on the railing. His name was David, also known as a weirdo at school, oddly handsome, excellent in academics, and strangely, he repeated a grade twice. No one knew the reason behind it. The crowd dispersed angrily, a gust of wind ruffling the short hair of the young man who caught my eye. Warm blood rushed out of my nose uncontrollably. Looking up, David approached me and handed me a clean handkerchief, saying, "Cathy, let me help you." Every story must have a beginning, not just a sudden gust of wind, not a white school uniform, not a handkerchief stained with blood. The real beginning was when he nervously carried me and rushed to the sick bay. Dizzy, I leaned on his bony shoulder, catching a whiff of faint peppermint fragrance. As I was about to faint, I saw red blood spreading on his white uniform, creating a large stain. Later, David transferred to my class and even became my classmate. My memory was getting worse, always losing things. But David always seemed to know what was on my mind. He would effortlessly find the things I had lost. Once I forgot about my period, staining my pants red without realizing it. A few rude and lewd boys whistled, mocking me with filthy language. Usually calm and composed, David exploded that day. He charged at them, punching them one after another. Several people ended up in a brawl that no one could break up. It wasn't until the teacher arrived that they were forcefully separated. David not only got injured but also received a severe reprimand. While he tended to his wounds, I couldn't help but ask, "David, are you nice to me out of pity?" David looked at me firmly, his pitch-black eyes shining. "Cathy, I just want to see you happy." Overwhelmed, I bit my lip tightly, tears flowing uncontrollably. All the oppression and grievances seemed to find an outlet, pouring out completely. During those dark times, David was there with me every step of the way. He always found ways to make me smile. Every time he walked me home after school, he would have something I liked in his hands. In winter, it was steaming hot dogs, in summer, refreshing juice. He once said he would love me forever, and betrayers would go to hell. He would carefully hold my hand, his palm always warm and sincere. But we had only been married for a short while. I never expected him to change his mind so quickly. He used every means to force me into divorce so he could be with another woman openly. Betrayers will go to hell. David pondered on this phrase, shook his head lightly, and said with a soft chuckle, "Do you really believe such a childish saying? Stop torturing yourself with the past." David tried to pull me up, but I pushed him away with all my strength. Just then, Helen approached in red high heels. Her voice trembled as she spoke, "Cathy, I'm sorry, I can't help it. But I can't control my emotions. You can hit me or scold me, maybe that would make you feel better." Helen was my colleague, just graduated, young and pretty, but due to her weak personality, she was often harassed by male colleagues at work. I had helped her a few times, and she always stuck by my side. Little did I know, behind her seemingly gentle and pitiful facade, she had a cunning plan. She was getting close to me to seduce my husband. I was furious, wanting to slap her. But as my hand rose, David grabbed it. He said, "It's not her fault. I have no feelings for you anymore, yet you refuse to divorce, not allowing me to find someone who'd obey me. Fine, let's divorce then." David's expression changed slightly. He seemed to be in disbelief that I was so willingly letting him go this time. If you have any conditions, feel free to mention them. I'll do my best to compensate you, but please don't disturb us anymore. David shielded the frightened Helen behind him. I slapped him and still felt unsatisfied. I smashed the cake on him and kept hitting him. David stood there motionless, letting me vent. My head began to ache again. 2 years ago, I was deceived into a black car by my stepsister and went missing for 12 hours. David got seriously injured trying to save me, nearly losing consciousness. I sustained a severe head injury, losing memories of that painful time, leaving behind serious consequences. The pain was excruciating, like a stabbing dagger in my heart. The doctor warned of severe consequences if it continued to worsen. What's wrong? Are you feeling sick again? David looked tense, and a ridiculous thought crossed my mind. If I died in pain, would he regret treating me so heartlessly? Back home, I threw away all his belongings. I called Linda to help me draft a divorce agreement. Linda was my best friend and now a renowned lawyer specializing in marital disputes. She knew everything between David and me. On the phone, Linda hesitated. Are you sure? When Linda arrived, I was calmly shredding our photos one by one. Lost in thought, Linda took the scissors away, saving the last photo. She hesitated. Maybe David had his reasons. If he regrets it, would you forgive him? No. Seeing my firm determination, Linda finally breathed a sigh of relief. Cathy, you've finally figured it out. That's great, but her expression was melancholic. Keep moving forward, things will get better. I entrusted Linda to handle the divorce proceedings. David had long wanted to get rid of me, and I didn't want to linger in his life either. So the divorce negotiations went smoothly. 3 days later, I met David. Under the gloomy drizzle, an inescapable gloom enveloped us. David leaned against the wall in a well-fitted shirt and trousers. His complexion was grim, displaying a sickly pallor. When he saw me, he even flashed a provocative smile. Why are you so late? Regretting it? Due to our short marriage period, the staff hoped we would consider carefully, so they led us to a small room to talk things over once more. No need. David didn't hesitate. He picked up the pen and signed his name. Seeing me hesitating to sign, he grew impatient. He bit his cigarette, looked down at me and said, regret it now, huh? I stared coldly at the man who used to love me the most, speaking the most hurtful words, trying to memorize his indifferent expression in my mind with stern brows and a sharp jawline, his fair neck highlighted by the protruding Adam's apple. The face behind the thin smoke looked even more handsome than 10 years ago. I held the divorce agreement in my hand, snatched the cigarette from his mouth, and said, I've told you, I hate the smell of smoke. I pressed the crimson-hot cigarette butt into his palm firmly. David, in my heart, you're already dead. David laughed as if he had heard the funniest joke in the world, his shoulders trembling in pain. After completing the divorce formalities, Helen cautiously walked over and stood by David's side. She greeted me quietly, but her engagement ring stood out conspicuously on her finger. Since we're all here, why not just go ahead and get married? It would save us the trouble. Cathy, you've misunderstood. A bitter feeling surged in my heart, but I couldn't be bothered to exchange words with them, so I just turned and left. David stopped me, saying, Cathy, although we're settling our accounts, if there's anything I can help you with in the future, you can still come to me. You'll always be special to me. David's usually deep voice now carried a sense of brokenness. My heart clenched at the pain, feeling ridiculous. We've taken such a decisive step, why say all this, trying to show how noble and compassionate he was? I didn't look back, nor did I stop. Things can never be settled between us, you'll always owe me. The sky was heavy with dark clouds, the rain was falling lightly, like tiny needles sprinkling down. The city was still bustling with traffic and pedestrians, the lights and shadows before me distorted in the blur. At the traffic lights, a blinding car light shone towards me, the driver honking wildly and cursing me. I didn't react in time, stood still in my place. It wasn't until someone pulled me away that I snapped out of it. I stared blankly at the man in front of me, with a mix of mystery in his features. It was Simon. Before I married David, Simon was my supposed fiancé. Simon stood at 6 feet tall, his fragmented fringe dampened by the rain. He bent down, gently but firmly placed his hand on the back of my head, burying it deep into his chest. I could hear his muffled and hurried heartbeat. I tried to push him away, but then I heard his plea, restrained yet urgent, "It's my birthday today, let me hold you, consider it my gift." His tone was light yet menacing, but more filled with resignation. "Can't you just see it clearly, Cathy? What's so great about David, why can't you let him go?" I gave Simon a pale smile. "Yeah, what's so great about him after all?" I seemed to have forgotten. Simon took me home, patiently helping me dry my hair. I used to despise Simon. He always seemed cold and distant, possessive to the extreme, using any means to get what he wanted, even locking me up in his house once to force me to marry him. But thinking about it later, I realized he was quite pitiful too. He was a bastard child, every step he took had to be careful, surrounded by people who were scheming against him. Like me, we both had no family, both trying desperately to cling to something. Forget about David, he's not worth it. It's time to take your medication, Cathy. The night crept into the room like a fierce beast. In the middle of the night, I was in pain, drenched in cold sweat. I fell into a nightmare again, a memory I had forgotten, violently crashing in my mind. Broken, messy, hopeless. I couldn't see anything clearly, hear anything. Fear coiled around me like a poisonous snake, suffocating me with pain. Eventually, I faintly heard Linda and Simon arguing. "Are you crazy? Do you know what you're doing? You'll kill her." I was taken to the hospital. When I woke up, I saw Simon sitting by the bed, his face showing signs of sleepless night, long eyelashes casting a shadow of bluish-gray on his cheeks. He pinched the bridge of his nose, trying to stay awake, asking me, "Feeling better?" The smell of disinfectant filled the air, making me sneeze several times in a row. I should have guessed earlier, Simon had been monitoring me all along. Ever since I married David, wherever I went, I saw Simon's shadow. Sometimes he was working in a cafe, sometimes talking to his assistant on the street, or sitting in a car watching me from a distance. He always seemed to be following me at a distance. But every time we met, he would tirelessly remind me to take my medication. As if constantly reminding me that I was sick. It was really annoying. Ignoring my irritation, Simon handed me a glass of water and the medication again. "Take the medicine." His voice was gentle but firm, no room for refusal. Just as domineering and unreasonable. I stubbornly refused to take it, hating when people forced me to do things I didn't like. We stood there in a stalemate, the air pressure dropping a few degrees, making even Simon's assistant sweat in nervousness. Simon had a bad temper, and people around him were afraid of him, but I wasn't scared at all. Pointing to the door, I continued to confront him. "Leave, I don't want to see you." Simon let out an almost inaudible sigh, not angry, just placed the water glass in front of me, urging me to get better soon. When Linda came to see me, her eyes were red. She hugged me, trying to comfort me, but ended up crying loudly herself. If you didn't know, you'd think she just had a painful breakup. After calming down, Linda told me that the post-divorce matters had been almost settled. She said, "David, to compensate you, has left all his assets to you, willing to leave with just the clothes on his back." Linda's voice was hoarse from crying. "Cathy, forget about David, and also forgive yourself." My gaze fell quietly outside the window, where I saw the drifting leaves and felt a strange mix of emotions. I nodded and smiled. Sure, why not? There was a big empty space in my heart, but I wasn't very sad. It wasn't that hard to forget someone. To leave the hospital sooner and recover faster, I cooperated with the doctor's treatment. The medicine was bitter, but I didn't sneakily pour it away again. During this time, I still slept a lot, sometimes even for a whole day and night, until Simon woke me up. Being awake at odd hours left me feeling restless from an inexplicable sense of emptiness, and I didn't show him a good attitude. Simon only reminded me to take my medicine and sleep, but he didn't let me sleep too much. Maybe being the CEO for too long made him more and more domineering. "Simon, have I spoiled you too much, becoming more and more unreasonable?" Simon just lowered his eyes in silence, his gaze unreadable. In the past, I could always provoke Simon. He couldn't argue with me, couldn't use force, and would end up red-faced and angrily leaving. I didn't know what he had been through, but now, no matter how much I acted out, I couldn't make him react. The doctor said I was recovering well. Finally, I could be discharged from the hospital, and I thought Simon still wouldn't let me go. But on the day I was discharged, I didn't see Simon. It was his assistant, Richard, who came to pick me up. Richard helped me move my stuff to the car and kept stealing glances at me, looking like he wanted to say something. When we were close to my home, Richard couldn't hold back anymore. "Linda, could you go see Simon? He can't." I cut him off before he finished his sentence, leaving Richard frustrated. Despite my reluctance, he changed the direction of the car and took me to Simon's house. I felt a mix of anger and amusement, realizing that Simon's illness must be hereditary. Richard, who followed Simon around every day, also seemed to have a similar temper. When irritated, Simon's house had facial recognition, so I quickly entered. It was spacious, minimally decorated, and eerily empty, as if no one had ever lived there before. In the bedroom, I heard the sound of a glass breaking. As I walked in, I saw Simon in a thin white nightshirt, exhaustedly rubbing his face. Startled by the noise, he looked up alertly, asking, "Who's there?" When he saw me, his eyes showed surprise. "What are you doing here?" he said, realizing and hurriedly covering his face. "Don't look." Red spots still covered Simon's face. "Have you been drinking?" Simon was allergic to alcohol, and drinking too much would give him a fever and a rash all over his body. "Just a little." I didn't press him further on why he drank. I went to the kitchen, poured a glass of water, and handed it to him, imitating his commanding tone. "Take your medicine." After taking the anti-allergy medicine, he fell asleep again. When I tried to pull my hand away, he held on tighter. "Don't go. Can you stay?" I tried pulling my hand back several times, but he didn't respond. His grip was too strong, so I compromised. "Let go first, my hand hurts." Surprisingly, he listened and let go. Even in his sleep, he could listen to specific things. I couldn't tell if he was confused or just pretending. While Simon was in a feverish sleep, I used cooling patches, poured him water when thirsty, and busied myself until his temperature finally dropped, letting out a sigh of relief. Although Simon was allergic to alcohol, drinking a little wasn't an issue. Only when he drank too much like this time would such a severe reaction occur. A year ago, Simon had forcibly kept me in his house to prevent me from marrying David. I had smashed everything in his room, but Simon refused to let me go. He held me tightly, trying to calm me down. "Cathy, have you gone crazy? I want you to remember, you're my fiancé, and no one can take you away." That night, he drank a lot and lost his temper for the first time. "I'd rather have you hate me than ever let you go." He drank until he vomited, almost suffocating due to a severe allergic reaction. The situation was critical, with the doctor rushing in to save him, pulling him back from the brink of death. I took care of him all night and snuck away while he hadn't fully recovered. Today, I didn't know how much he had drunk to have such a severe reaction. Lying by the bed, my mind wandered, and eventually, I fell asleep too. When I woke up, I found myself on a large bed, taking Simon's spot. I could still smell his faint scent on the bedding, but he was nowhere to be seen. A tempting aroma wafted from the kitchen. It seemed he had a conscience and made many things I liked to eat. After eating and drinking my fill, I prepared to leave, but Simon stopped me. "Could you stay? Whatever you want to do, I can fulfill it for you." I looked at him calmly. "Simon, do you want to lock me up again?" As if burnt by my words, Simon let go of my hand. "I'm sorry, I'll drive you back." Neither of us spoke on the way back. When we got out of the car, Simon suddenly asked me, "Cathy, you once said that sick people have the privilege of being favored. Does that still hold true? Can I hug you?" "No." But my refusal was ineffective. Under the dim lamplight, Simon hung his head low, embracing me tightly. "I'm sorry. What do I have to do for you to forgive me and look back at me?" Perhaps due to Simon's sorrowful tone, I softened momentarily. When I lifted my head, I coincidentally saw a lonely figure upstairs. David lazily leaned on the balcony railing, looking down at me and Simon embracing. Despite being too far to see his expression clearly, the wind ruffled his short hair, a dash of crimson between his fingers, his figure frail like paper, as if he would scatter with a sigh. As time passed, I didn't know what I was expecting. In the end, I pushed Simon away. You did nothing wrong, but I don't like you. I dragged my heavy feet up the stairs, and the lights in the hallway flickered on as I approached. Opening the door, I finally saw David standing there. There was an undissolvable sadness in his eyes, his hands tightly clenched with slightly whitened knuckles. His skin was almost translucently white. I couldn't find you. I thought something happened to you. Turns out you've been with Simon all along, he said. I nodded truthfully. When I was in excruciating pain, Simon was the one who took me to the hospital and stayed with me for half a month. Was there something you wanted to talk to me about? I asked. He shook his head and said, not really. It's just that we've recently divorced, and not seeing you around is still something I'm not used to. He lowered his head slightly, his disheveled hair falling over his eyes, his thin lips curving into a bitter smile. I was reminded of the first time I had brought up breaking up, and he had worn the same dejected expression. He had stumbled, standing outside my dorm building for days, begging for my forgiveness. From afar, I couldn't see his face clearly, only his shoulders trembling slightly, as if he were crying. He had later confessed that he couldn't imagine life without me. And now, we had become strangers. He had schemed to force me to divorce him, and I had granted him the freedom he sought. But now that he was back, saying he couldn't bear to be without me, it felt like a colossal joke, one that was far from being funny. In this relationship, I had always been the favored one. David always put me first. He would smile more when I did, and he would appear sadder than me when I cried. I couldn't find another guy who treated me so well. This damn gentleness had made me drop all my defenses. I was so confident and carefree, never once thinking he would leave me. So when he actually betrayed me, it was incredibly hard to accept, continuing to deceive myself. But now I understand that nothing remains eternal and unchanged. Love can also vanish one day. However, I have no regrets. After logging into my long-unused social media account, I was startled by the numerous message notifications that popped up. I checked and realized that a novel I had written in college had suddenly gained popularity, and the comments section was filled with readers urging for updates. Back when David and I were deeply in love, I adapted our story into a novel and posted it online on a whim. I never expected that years later, while we had become strangers, our story would gain popularity. Many details had faded from my memory, but rereading the story still moved me deeply. Tears streamed down my face as the sky began to lighten. I had always loved writing novels, but I often rushed through the beginnings without reaching an ending. This time, I decided to write an ending for our story. David started showing up frequently in my thoughts. Unlike the novel, there were no tricks in reality. After losing me, he didn't regret or plead for forgiveness. He simply said we could still be friends. I had uttered many heartless words to him, but he just couldn't leave. He lingered in front of me every day, slowly eroding the final remnants of my filter towards him. Hello, a gentleman sent over coffee for you. In the coffee shop, the server interrupted my writing thoughts, and as I looked up in confusion, I saw David not far away sitting up straight, flashing a mischievous smile towards me. He always wore that expression when teasing me. No need, I'm afraid it's poisoned, I jokingly said. The part-time college student server, unsure of how to handle the situation, looked at David hesitantly, standing awkwardly in place. I didn't want to make it difficult for her, so I asked her to go ahead and put down the coffee first. As I walked home, the setting sun cast an orange-yellow light on the street. David was crouching on the ground, gently stroking a frightened little cat, surrounded by a faint halo of light. He looked up at me and said, Cathy, adopt this kitten. It will keep you company. I ignored him. David, I really don't understand you. What are you trying to do? How many more times do I have to say it? I never want to see you again. Don't overdo it, let's save each other some dignity. David stared at me blankly, then dejectedly hung his head, saying, I understand. I had written David's character to die, to save me from an accident, freezing his life at 25 years old. He died the year he loved me the most, on the eve of our wedding. Even as I finished typing the last word, I felt calm, as if recording a distant story. After posting the final chapter, the novel had just crossed 10,000 likes. A strange feeling surged within me, indescribable and not quite uncomfortable. Perhaps, this was the best ending. The coffee shop I frequented was up for sale with my first royalties in hand and some savings. I took the opportunity to acquire it. It wasn't in a bustling area, so the foot traffic wasn't high, and I could manage on my own. When I had spare time, I would make myself a cup of coffee, sit by the window, and start typing on my computer. David never visited again, but the stray cat became a regular at my shop. I would prepare some cat food for it, not adopting nor shooing it away. After it was done eating, it would cautiously approach me, huddling under my table, quietly listening to the sound of my typing on the keyboard, as if earnestly following along with my story. Linda was about to get married and invited me to her wedding. During the reception, she suddenly hugged me and burst into tears. "Cathy, you must be happy." When she threw the bouquet, it happened to hit me. I hadn't intended to catch it, but my reflexes beat my mind, and I caught it, with Simon quickly shielding me to prevent me from getting hurt. It seemed very ambiguous, and everyone began to see us as a couple. The crowd started teasing us, and I awkwardly kept my distance from Simon, inadvertently catching sight of David. He stood in the midst of the crowd, just as eye-catching, his gaze faintly fixed on me. Seeing him in that moment, my heartache inexplicably returned. Linda introduced me to a reliable psychologist, and every session with her made me feel light. On my way out from a session, I saw Helen. She was wearing a black dress, with shoulder-length hair, bearing a slight resemblance to me from years ago. Her face was pale, and her eyes were red and teary. Choking up, she said, "Cathy, can you go see David? He's been seriously injured." The breeze of early autumn was slightly chilly, making my nose tingle. "I'm not a doctor, there's no point in me going to see him, so don't come looking for me again." Helen was persistent and kept looking for me. "Cathy, if you don't go, you'll regret it for the rest of your life." But I still didn't go see him. Everything had ended, like a musical rest. Every week, Simon would take me for a follow-up checkup. The doctor said I needed to keep taking the medication, but the dosage could be reduced. On the way back, Simon's hand tapped on the steering wheel almost absent-mindedly, and after a while, he asked me, "Have you seen him recently?" I shook my head. "No. It's all over." After that, I never saw David again, nor did I see Helen. The two of them seemed to have completely disappeared from my world. Simon looked relieved, as if a weight had been lifted off his shoulders. He seemed to be in a good mood and suggested taking me to a newly opened Western restaurant for a candlelight dinner. I interrupted his plan. "Simon, I've lost the ability to love someone. Don't waste your time on me." Pushed open the car door and walked back home along a tree-lined path. In the past, whenever I worked late, David would come to pick me up. We would walk along this road, joking and laughing, and in the end, he would carry me back home. Suddenly, I felt overwhelmed. Traces of him were still lingering on the way home. I walked aimlessly through the town, tears streaming down my face in the bustling crowd. There were too many painful memories here, and the only good things left were what David had given me. The day I was kicked out of my house, he was by my side, giving me the courage to face the unknown. "Cathy, don't be afraid. As long as I'm here, you have a home." Unconsciously, I found myself at the foot of a mountain. Then a woman rushed out and grabbed me. "Cathy, it's really you, you've finally come back." The woman's hair was messy, her eyes full of fear and anxiety. I quickly recognized her. She was my stepsister Lucy. I felt a wave of disgust and tried to shake her off, but she held on to me as if clinging to a lifeline, desperately grasping me and speaking incoherently. "Cathy, you're finally back. I know I was wrong, please forgive me. I regretted it as soon as I tricked you into the car," I told David immediately. I really had no other choice. I didn't expect things to get so serious. I didn't expect David to die. Several medical staff came running over, pulling her away. They apologized to me and said, "Are you all right?" She has mental issues and keeps sneaking out. Linda was very agitated. I'm not crazy, she's really my sister. As Linda was dragged away, she suddenly let out a sharp cry of despair. Cathy, the one who really killed him is you. Why do you get to forget everything so easily? Several nurses discussed by the side. She brought it on herself, not worthy of sympathy. The most pitiful one was her sister. It was said that after her sister was tricked into a black car, she was tortured by 3 or 4 men for hours just as she was about to be sold. Her boyfriend arrived just in time. Unfortunately, fate played a cruel trick. Her sister, frightened and in shock, accidentally hurt her boyfriend, leading to his unexpected death. Since then, her sister had gone mad, living in her own imagined world. My head was buzzing. Those forgotten memories were becoming clear, and my head started to ache uncontrollably again. Instinctively, I rummaged through my bag for painkillers, my hands trembling uncontrollably, and the pills spilled all over the floor. I clutched my chest, in pain and unable to breathe. I opened my mouth, but no sound came out. Why did I keep having that nightmare? Why did I see David less every time I took the medicine? Why was I so sleepy? Each time falling asleep, there was always a strange voice guiding me. In fact, I should have guessed it a long time ago, but I didn't want to accept it, nor did I want to wake up. David was really dead. 2 years ago, Lucy tricked me out. She owed a lot of money due to borrowing and got into big trouble. Pushed to a corner by some thugs, she even asked me for money. I ignored her, and that made her hold a grudge against me. When she reached a dead end, she tricked me out, intending to use me as a bargaining chip. I never thought she could be so ruthless. As I realized the danger and tried to escape, it was already too late. They covered my mouth, dragged me into the car, drugged me, and took me to a remote industrial area. With my eyes blindfolded, I was locked in a small room. I gave them all my money, begging them to let me go. But they were not satisfied, pinned me down on the ground, and scratched. Methy laughed deviously, like demons crawling out of hell. After venting their anger, they discussed how to sell me for a good price. The fear and pain engulfed me like dark, cold waves, drowning me over and over again. At the most desperate moment, the tattered wooden door was finally kicked open. In the dim light, all I could see was them swinging bats at each other, creating a chaotic scene. But due to the ringing in my ears, I couldn't hear anything. I seized the only chance to escape. After being in a daze for a few days, when I woke up, David's body had just been found, missing the window for rescue. I couldn't accept the truth. When I cried until I couldn't anymore, I started to self-hypnotize. I told myself that none of it was real, it must be a dream. David once told me that even ghosts were very timid, and loud crying would scare them. So every time I secretly took a lot of sleeping pills, would lie on the bed with a smile, trying to find him in my dreams. I tried to forget the painful experiences by fantasizing. In my imagination, David was saved. Our wedding went as planned, and everything was as beautiful as ever. I enjoyed it, but didn't realize my nerves were weakening. Simon couldn't bear to see me continue like this, so he watched over me, forced me to get treatment, forced me to take medication. He even found a hypnotist to hypnotize me as part of the treatment. Simon wanted me to forget about David. But how could I hate him? I remembered everything. It turned out that David was just my imagination, and Helen too. I cried uncontrollably, my heart ached as if it was about to stop beating. He never betrayed me, yet I hated him so much. I didn't know how to face the truth, or what to do. I curled up in a corner, tears falling heavily on the floor. Then, someone squatted down beside me. I rubbed my eyes, and saw David. I thought I was hallucinating again, but I still wanted to hug him, only to find myself hugging empty air, falling to the ground in disappointment. I'm sorry for forgetting you. I hurt you, portrayed you in such a bad light. In the sunlight, David's body looked like a transparent shadow. He tried to help me up, but his hands passed through my body. He looked very sad, yet managed to force a gentle smile. Cathy, stop crying. You've only existed in my imagination. Why should I stop being sad? No, "I've always been by your side, never left," he said. After his death, he had been with me in spirit. Watching me talk to the air, calling his name, laughing and crying, like a fool. He explained how he had been hovering in front of me all this time, but I couldn't see him or hear his voice. David was a bit exaggerated in his storytelling, then gave a look of distress. Like old times, despite feeling sad, he clumsily tried to make me happy. I looked at him half-believingly. "How can you prove that you're not just my imagination?" David reached out and lightly touched my head. "That's not important. I'd rather you hate me than see you torment yourself forever in the past. Promise me, forget about me." I bit my lip, held back tears, shook my head stubbornly. "No, I won't, I can't forget you." David seemed to anticipate my response, sighed helplessly. "I can't deal with you." Perhaps from being a ghost for so long, feeling uncomfortable not being spoken to, David became a chatterbox, talking non-stop. From the past to the present. He confessed that he had a secret crush on me for a long time. He intentionally repeated a grade just to be in the same class as me. He admitted to feeling insecure, thinking he wasn't good enough for me, which is why he never approached me. He expressed his jealousy watching me chat with other guys, saying it hurt more to see me cry than to be stabbed with a knife. We cautiously drew closer, our lips met, but we couldn't feel each other's warmth. We revisited many things we had done before. David accompanied me from sunrise to sunset. And slowly, I accepted that David was here with me in spirit. David smiled and opened his arms towards me. I almost instinctively cried and fell into his embrace. "Cathy, I'm willing to exchange 10 years of happiness in my next life for you to completely forget me in this life." David turned into a glow, gradually dissipating. "Cathy, I truly love you very much, so forget me." I shook my head helplessly. Memories of him and those painful moments were being erased bit by bit. I was lucky to have had a coward loving me as if his life depended on it. But sadly, I'll never know. David's epilogue: after I die, my soul floats in the air, staying by Cathy's side, unwilling to leave. Cathy lies in the hospital bed, covered in wounds, asleep for days, trapped in nightmares with a pained expression on her face. I can't imagine the inhuman torture she went through. The thought of her despair when being bullied cuts me deep. I go crazy and beat up those scumbags. The sticks hitting me didn't make me feel any pain. I got severely injured, but I kept standing up, blood gushing from the wound on my forehead, looking fierce. They had never seen someone who wasn't afraid of death like me. They hesitated, cautious. I told them I had called the police and they were on their way. They couldn't run away. They looked alert outside, as if hearing police sirens, and then scattered to escape. As they fled, they didn't forget to kick me a few times in frustration. With my last bit of strength, I crawl towards Cathy. She curls up in a corner, shivering uncontrollably. I take off my jacket and put it on her, holding her tightly, wanting to comfort her, but all the words stuck in my throat. Her ears and eyes are badly injured, stuck in a fearful chaos, making me ache. Her life should have been precious, just like the radiant smile she gave me the first time we met on the playground, but her carefree joy was so short-lived. Cathy seems to mistake me for a bad person, pushing me away in fear. I fall to the ground, too weak to chase after her. When Cathy wakes up and learns the truth, she can't accept my death and falls into deep self-blame. She breaks down, pounding her chest and crying hoarsely. Simon tries to stop her, attempting to calm her down, but in vain. It's only when she's given a sedative that she finally calms down, tears silently streaming down her face. I want to say, "I've always been here, Cathy, stop crying." I want to hug her, but my hands pass through her body. She can't see me or hear my voice. Later, Cathy starts exhibiting strange behaviors, calling my name to the empty air, sometimes laughing, sometimes crying. I joyfully think she can see me, but she just conjured up an image of me. To avoid reality, after the heavy blow, she selectively forgets those painful memories. Simon, in order to not upset her, plays along. He always stays close, keeping away anything or anyone that could harm her. Until one day, he realizes this can't go on. He forces her to seek treatment, using hypnosis to make her detest me, let go of me. He succeeds. I watch as Cathy throws away all my things, calmly cutting up our photos one by one. Snipping away each photo feels like erasing our memories. Standing on the balcony, I watch Cathy and Simon embrace downstairs, and surprisingly, a sense of relief washes over me. I'm relieved that she finally stepped forward, finally embraced someone else. The lights in the room are turned on, and I wait for her to come home as usual. But this time, she speaks to me, leaving me in shock, yet elated. Though I have many things to say, knowing how hard it was for her to let go of me, I say words that go against my heart. I know my time is limited and want to see her more before I leave, to say a few more words to her, so I act selfishly, shamelessly following her, and no matter how she tried to push me away, I stay. Watching her slowly regain herself and return to a normal life makes me content. And on that day at the foot of the mountain, she remembers everything, she sees me again. We reminisce about the past, spending our final moments together. Cathy, forget me, forget those painful memories. Cathy shakes her head, tears streaming down, yet her gaze towards me grows more distant. As I'm about to vanish, I see Simon rushing over and embracing the fainting Cathy. Linda's epilogue, Cathy left without saying goodbye. I heard she came back to the town and even met Lucy. We were all worried, so we rushed back to the town in the middle of the night to look for her. Finally, we found her at the foot of the mountain. The sunshine that day was so harsh that we could hardly open our eyes for a moment. Seeing her collapse on the ground with tears still wet on her face, I couldn't help but feel so uneasy. We took her to the hospital. When she woke up, she smiled at me, a smile I hadn't seen in a long time. "Linda, I'm so hungry," she said. I was surprised because Cathy hadn't called me that for a long time. Cathy had a great appetite. She ate a whole pizza and 2 pairs of chicken wings. Cathy had always kept things to herself, and I wasn't sure if she had regained her memory. So, I asked her some questions tentatively, but she calmly shook her head and said I was strange. Her eyes seemed clear and bright, not like she was pretending. This time, it seemed like she had forgotten even more. I was relieved for her, but thinking about David made me feel a tinge of sadness once again. The day she left the town, Cathy looked back for a long time. She said she wouldn't come back because there was nothing worth her nostalgia here. She adopted the stray cat. The cat was well-behaved and clingy, but it only stuck to Cathy and wouldn't let others touch it. Its gentle yet domineering behavior was just like David. Cathy's first novel became a hit. She even gave me a physical copy, and after reading it, I couldn't help but cry uncontrollably. Petting the cat, Cathy smiled and said, "I also love this story the most, so deeply moved by David. I really love him too much. Every time I finish reading, I feel so emotionally overwhelmed." "Right, David?" She named the cat David too. The cat even cooperatively meowed a few times in her arms. But she seemed to forget that what she wrote was the story between her and David. In early autumn, I went to the cemetery to visit David. I put the book that recorded their story on his tombstone, with an old photo of Cathy and David inside. They were in school uniforms, looking young and innocent. Cathy closed her eyes in prayer, while David gazed at her affectionately. I stood in front of his tombstone for a long time, talking about many things related to Cathy. As I walked away, a gust of wind blew, rustling the pages of the book and lifting their photo. The wind seemed to carry their story, drifting towards an unknown horizon.